Telecommunications, of course, incredibly important for any country, and particularly for emerging countries like South Africa and countries north of here. Let's have a look back at what's happened in 2012 and have a sneak preview of what might happen in 2013 with Dobek Pato, who's from Africa Analysis. Dobek, it's been an interesting year in many ways, some good things, some bad things. Where would you like to start? Why don't we start with the bad? Why don't we start with Telkom?
Is that the favorite bad apple on the block? Yeah, rather probably unfortunate year for Telkom, especially when you look at what happened to its share price and I suppose decrease in profits. So not a good performance at all. And you know, there have been a number of incidents, I suppose, over the year that have set back Telkom. But the main underlying aspect is the continued competition from the mobile operators predominantly, where we see a steady fixed to mobile migration or churn, where people abandon their fixed line phones and decide to operate just using mobile communications. And also the slowdown in the deployment of data products such as ADSL. And that has to do really with South African socio-economic scene, the demographics. You know, there's only so many people within the coverage area that can afford to take up these services at present and want to use them, whereas mobile communications on the data side as well reach far wider and are a lot more prevalent within the population. So it's a competitive environment, and apart from that, obviously Telkom's to an extent, I suppose, maybe not quite a conflict, but not seeing quite eye to eye between top senior Telkom management and the government, and what the government intends to do or how it intends to use Telkom going forward in developing broadband infrastructure and services in South Africa. So yeah, for Telkom, unfortunately, not a very good year. I think from the large telecommunications operators, especially those that are listed, that's probably the only entity that has fared relatively weakly in the market. I suppose the other one would be Broadband Infraco, because we really haven't seen much happen on that side. That's the government-owned telecommunications wholesale operator providing a national backbone network, which came into the market a few years ago with the mandate of lowering prices on national long-haul routes, which was achieved because it did introduce an element of competition to Telkom, and prices began to decrease initially quite a bit, and then gradually over time they've continued to do so. But unfortunately for Broadband Infraco, it hasn't really benefited from those decreases, unlike other operators in the market.
One of the other things that really caught my eye in 2012 was the re-emergence of a certain gentleman called Not Craig, who just couldn't sit down and retire gracefully, but just wanted to be part of a very vibrant telecommunications scene. Do you see that as a positive for the market, both from a development point of view and also from a consumer's point of view?
Okay, I was going to ask you whether you see it as a negative. That's why you're mentioning it now. But I think it's probably rather positive in the sense that for two reasons. Alan Not Craig is a fairly, I think, aggressive person when it comes to business, to commerce, and quite an assertive person. And also he's obviously changed his mind and outlook on life quite a bit since he left Vodacom, where he was leading a very powerful, large telecommunications operator in the market, not ashamed to charge relatively high prices for products and services. Now, having arrived at Cell C, he seems to have done a 180-degree flip and is professing continued and significant reduction in telecommunications services in order to make the market more competitive and reach further. So I think from that perspective, Cell C is benefiting. It's from the sense that it is certainly becoming a lot more prominent in the market in what it does. If that translates into actual financial performance in the medium to long term, that remains to be seen still. I think another aspect is with Alan Not Craig's arrival at Cell C, which is we've heard a certain degree of speculation in the market over the past months. Is Cell C actually setting itself up for an acquisition by a larger global operator? And if so,
Do you think that's why that he was brought in? Sorry to interrupt you, Dobek, but do you think that's why he was brought in, because he's a deal maker and he's a high-profile name? And if he's at the head of a company like Cell C, then of course what's going to happen is that people might immediately think, well, I can do a deal with this gentleman because he's got a reputation, and therefore we will do so. Because there's been a bit of talk recently about Bharti Airtel thinking about coming back.
I certainly wouldn't discredit it, any of that sort of background noise in the market. And it has happened before, in the past, before the arrival of Alan Not Craig at Cell C. So there have been other times before where Cell C was possibly looking for a buyer, or Cell C's shareholders, let's say, out of the Middle East. But I think it certainly is beginning to start looking that way, as if Alan Not Craig's arrival at Cell C is very coincidental with maybe a stronger push of trying to sell that asset to someone else. And if that happens, we probably would see a stronger competitor arriving in the market. And whether it's Bharti Airtel, whether it's France Telecom, Orange, whether it's someone else, remains to be seen. Whoever's, I suppose, prepared to pay the price. The challenge is obviously, even if you have a stronger competitor than Cell C itself, a global competitor arriving in this market, what is the strategy going to be from the new telecommunications operator to change Cell C? Alan Not Craig has been changing the operations at Cell C, but it really requires a fundamental change, I think, and shift in the market for Cell C to be very successful, as opposed to being always a third runner-up and want to be in the market compared to Vodacom and MTN. And it's not easy in a market such as South Africa.
Just before you go on, we've got a minute to go. I want you to look into your crystal ball and give us a couple of tips for Telecoms 2013, if you would.
Okay. Well, certainly I think what we're going to see is a continuation of the data prices reduction and data competition. Also voice, but data is now where the focus has shifted significantly. We've seen that happen over the past 6 to 12 months, intensification of competition there. Now, obviously, with the gradual deployment of 4G or LTE technology, which is much faster mobile broadband delivered to the consumer and the business, as predominantly SME segment, I think this is where the focus is going to lie. On the fixed line side, we're seeing increasingly more activity also in fiber optic deployment from various vendors and operators, and it is inevitable that will continue to escalate as LTE deploys, because LTE needs fiber optic connectivity to be able to deliver the types of speeds and quality of service that we expect from the technology. And more progress on the fixed line national backhaul, the large national telecommunications networks, which naturally will translate into greater competition, decrease in prices. So I think overall, from an end user perspective, continued decrease in prices, and hopefully growth in quality of services delivered, and the bouquet of services that we'll see.